I want to first say this is our colloquium, but it's also part of an open science series of talks at libraries, and
Mm.
Health and Human Sciences has been sponsoring kind of all academic year. So this is one of our last for this year. These are all archived on the library's YouTube channel. I don't know if you knew the library's had a YouTube channel, but they've got one with lots of good stuff there. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Gilad Feldman. Dr. Feldman received his PhD from Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Then he did postdocs at University of Illinois and Maastricht University. He's currently an assistant professor at University of Hong Kong. Dr. Feldman has a number of content-related interests that are quite interesting, including judgment and decision-making, altruism, morality and folk psychology, and personal values. He does all of his research with a super strong emphasis on open science. I mean, he's a strong advocate for and a great exemplar of putting open science into your research. And he's probably best known for his multiple large-scale registered report studies. He has 58 publications from his lab, and an almost equal number of large and collaborative studies published or in stage one accepted. He makes his papers open, he shares his data, code, and materials. And to my mind, he's the king of the registered report model. And I'm super happy that he's here to share his experience and enthusiasm for this mechanism. So I'll give it to you, Dr. Feldman.
Wow, thank you
I
for
should also
that.
say in the
Yeah,
chat is a link to his slides. So
right. So in the spirit of open science, everything that I do, the talks, the slides, all my teaching, and the research, I aim to be as open as possible. So you're very welcome to follow that link over here or scan the QR code, and this link will appear on the bottom right the entire time. So either now or later, feel free to download. There's lots of content. Overall, there's like 100 slides. We're not going to go over the 100 slides. We're going to do a lot faster and skip some slides. But just to say that if you're interested in anything that I'm presenting, you can definitely go and look at the hidden slides and click on some of the links in order to get more information. So it's really great. You reached out, that you're doing a lot of stuff about open science. It's always an honor and a privilege to be able to talk to people that care about these topics. For the past 7 years, I've been trying to understand what are some of the challenges and what is my role. I think I caught it at somewhat an early stage compared to perhaps some others while I was doing the postdoc, just coming out of all the findings that are being disseminated about the open science collaborations, the mass replication efforts, and all these discussions about where we are with science, what's happening. But I think especially the last 2 or 3 years have given me pause with the pandemic, of where we are, what we should be doing, and what is my role and how I can contribute to that. So if later you want to check out some of the other things that I talk about in terms of open science, everything that I do is on YouTube, and all of my teaching materials and the talks are on open science framework, which is the way that we disseminate both research and other things like teaching and talks online with the open science community. So I'll just start with the obvious, because I feel like it needs to be said every single time, is that we're facing so many challenges with the global warming. It just came out of a pandemic. We really need credible, optimized science, and we're having all these kinds of debate now. I'm in the US. I can just see how profound these debates are about what is science, what is truth, what can we really follow scientists on. So we need to address these kinds of things. And as social psychologist, a social scientist, as somebody who does decision-making research, I know the challenges of being able to overcome some of these biases, of making sense of all this amount of information coming at us from every possible direction. So I just want to start that and say that if you're already interested in open science, that means you're on the right track. Because up until 2022, I had to promote open science and tell people that they need to do open science. But 2022, UNESCO started to say that this is needed, and now it's more a matter of how would you implement open science. 2023 has been announced by NASA as the year of the open science, and there are all kinds of conferences that are coming out right now with the Center of Open Science. The Biden-Harris administration is promoting this in different ways. And then to my great surprise, even when the G7 meets together to discuss all the challenges that are happening right now in the world, they take time to discuss science and technology and talking about the FAIR principles, findable, accessible, and so forth, about the need to implement open science. So now we understand that we need to do open science. It's something that's very important. The world leaders are talking about this. So what are the challenges, and how do register reports and peer community, which I'll talk about is like register reports 2.0, how do these help us to address some of these challenges? It might seem like it's completely off topic, but I feel like it's very important to set up some of the solutions that I'll be discussing. So one of the main challenges for me in the last 2-3 years, I've just decided, with all due respect to university pressures for us to publish a lot and publish in high impact factors, when I look at some of the science practices that we have about submitting to these publishers that, of course, charge us and our libraries a lot of money, it just seems like something is very wrong. So when we look at how much money they're making, these for-profit publishers, something seems completely misaligned. It's a monster that we created over time. And when you look at, for example, how much of the profit that they're taking, it's a lot more than what you would have expected if just to keep things a little bit balanced. So here's like an example of a comparison between Elsevier, Springer Nature, and let's say Walmart, Toyota, and some of the other companies. All kinds of challenges about these publishers. I see this as like, to me, I can't justify this. So increasingly, I try to move away from for-profit publishers, or at least get the for-profit publishers to consider to do things in a different way. And I'll talk about one big solution on how to help publishers and authors that submit to these publishers to move away from that. But just the fact that we do everything for free, and then we give it to the publishers, we sign away our IPs, and then they charge us to get access to our own research is absolutely ridiculous. We're failing our taxpayers, the people that put their trust in us. No wonder that there's so many concerns about conflicts of interest and what it is that we do, and whether we're making the most of the money that is entrusted to us. So some of the solutions are about, as researchers, we do have power. We have come to think of ourselves as lacking power, but we definitely do have power. There's all sorts of things that we can do in order to empower ourselves and the people around us, authors, community, in order to fight these publishers and improve the academic system. And I'll talk about very concrete ways in which we can do that. Another big problem, which I'll talk about how we should address, is that there's something very broken about the peer review system. So coming out of a pandemic, people have concerns about what just happened with this vaccine. How was this vaccine approved? What was the peer review process? Was it an independent team? Is it experts? Who did this review? What kind of review? And so forth. And it's ridiculous that the way that we do peer review is that we think about this as this is what differentiates science from all sorts of other hacks. Right. But when it comes down to it, we can't really evaluate the peer review because we don't have access to it. So it's been hidden. And as our commitment to taxpayers, they pay our salaries, they fund our research, but then we tell them you don't have any access to our work. As a reviewer, I refuse to review anything that I don't have any access to the data, the pre-registration, the materials. I need to understand what it is that I'm evaluating. I'm not evaluating a brief summary of something that could or perhaps is not real. If I am asked to review, there are certain things that I require of that, but most of the people just review based on, the summaries, which I don't understand. And of course, after this is also hidden behind the journal, Manuscript Central, and all that. And I think at the core of all of this, and I feel this, and we just had the discussion before this talk about all these misaligned incentives. So on the one side, we all really want to do good science. So we want to have all these research practices where we thrive to get closer to the truth. We want more knowledge accumulation. So we talk about all sorts of things. Like, we know replications are important, and we know that we need to do error detection, and we know that we need to, when you have two camps, adversarial collaborations are the way to go forward, and diversity and and so forth. So we need to balance a lot of things. We do want novelty, but we also need to like revisit things in order to have credibility. So on the one side, there's all these things that we all know that we need. We teach this in our research methods. This is how we guide our students. But on the other side, we've got the system that emphasizes the impact factors and the number of publications. I just heard the number for like some of your domains. I'm just like baffled by the requirement for, I don't know, 20, 30 papers in order to get a tenure track position. When you communicate numbers, obviously something else comes to mind other than just research integrity and doing high quality, rigorous research. So at the heart of this is this conflict between what's best for science, that we all know what that is, high quality research published regardless of the outcome. If a vaccine works or doesn't work, we need to know. So if we have 100 studies on a vaccine and only 2 of them work, and we only publish the 2 that work, we have 98 of those that don't work. We need to know all of that across we need to know across the 100 studies what has worked and what hasn't. So we need all of that. But what's best for scientists is that very often, both in our submissions and the way that we've been evaluated, what's best for us is to produce great results. And great results are often P alpha, lower than 0.05, novel, exciting stuff that can get a lot of media attention afterwards. So that's very unfortunate. In addition, I think we all know this gaming system that we have. You try one journal, get rejected, try another, get rejected. You just go through this whole thing from the top to the bottom. Unbelievable load on the reviewers and the system to the point where we can't find reviewers anymore. And we're just, wasting years. So if we have a pandemic and there's a vaccine out there that needs to be disseminated, tested, get to the field, having 3-5 years of peer review going through each one of these journals is, of course, affecting our lives, causing a lot of pain, suffering, and possibly death. So I really like this book. To me, it was one of the game changers back in 2015. Chris Chambers, who we'll talk about, is the person who introduced registry reports to the world, came out with the 7 deadly sins of psychology. It's a manifesto for how we can reform our culture. As a judgment decision-making scholar, I loved how he summarized all these biases that we have when we review papers, when we look at academic literature. So we know that we have confirmation bias. We know about outcome bias, hindsight bias, and all these is leading to publication bias. So if you know all the results, if you're evaluating things, the results are affecting the way that you evaluate things. So if things worked, then you think, oh, high quality. In terms of hindsight bias, it's like when you have a replication, you would think that everything is not surprising. If it's a successful replication, you say, we knew this all along because original findings. If it's a failed replication, we knew this all along because therefore, in order to really do high quality science, we need to know that we should overcome these biases. So we, in judgment decision making, preach to the world, you should do all these things in order to avoid your bias. But we very rarely look at ourselves and say, oh yeah, we're human. We also have biases. So back in 2015, I thought this is psychology. So people will say, yeah, of course, psychology. It's a weak science. It's not even a science. It's a science of blah, blah. If we go to the main, hardcore sciences, the exact sciences, then things are going to be different. But by now, we already know. It just came out 2 years ago, the cancer biology replication project, really unbelievably low rates of reproducibility and then afterwards replicability. That this is not the 7 deadly sins of psychology. This is the deadly sins of science overall. So across domains, we have a lot of these issues. So we need to talk about this paradox in these conflicts between what's good for science and what's good for scientists. When we talk to students, when we teach research methods, we tell the students that some things should be beyond our control. So we want to observe the truth in reality and document that. And the results should not be under our control because we're documenting what it is that's happening in real life. However, the thing that we're being evaluated on, the things that are important for us to advance our careers are also the results. So there's this inherent conflict that on one side, don't touch the results, but also make sure that the results are amazing. And in this is causes people a conflict that they need to overcome by doing all sorts of things. And this is like a summary by Chris Chambers and Monafo from Britain, just like summarizing all of the challenges that by now we have meta-scientific evidence showing us with citations that there's for each step in this life cycle of research. We have a citation that is telling us just how bad things are. So, for example, in terms of replication rates, the ratio of how many replication papers are to novel research, it's like only 1 in 1,000 papers gets replication. So we have this one finding that was published, I don't know, in the 1980s in Princeton, Purdue sample with 30 students. And since then, for 50 years, we've been saying, this is what things are. It works regardless all the time. We communicate this in TED Talks and in books. But we understand that we need to revisit this. We need to refresh this. We need to make sure that the originals are not a false positive, and so forth. We used to have a very big power with a very big problem with power. So a little bit easier for me with social psychology, online labor markets, can easily run 1,000 participants if I have a Qualtrics survey. But in my department, we have developmental, educational, neuroscientists, putting somebody in a scanner. First, very time intensive, very difficult to book the scanner, and it's very costly. So samples are sometimes very, very low, like 10, 20. We try to increase this, but then what do students do? They don't have that access. Each time you need to apply for a grant. So each one of these have a lot of challenges, questionable research practices, and finally, this obsession that we have with positive results. Only positive results are to be communicated, disseminated. So when I go around the world and talk to people about all these challenges, I get a lot of pushback. So perhaps because of all the talks that you're having about open science, you're a little bit more open and accepting towards the possibility of something going wrong. But sometimes some places are very traditional. So they say, what are you talking about? There's no problem with science. Electricity is working, the planes are flying, things are going as expected. So what are you talking about? So the way that I think about this is, even if you disagree with me about the issues, I think we can all agree on the aim of just trying to improve science overall. So, for example, I think about like climate change. On the left here, you've got this cartoon. People are talking about all sorts of things that we all want. We all want clean water and clean air. We want healthy children, sustainability, green jobs. And then somebody comes up and says, but what if this is all a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? For me, it's the same thing with science. Like, we're talking about things that we all want. We just want to do better science, open access for everybody, to improve the use of statistics, reduce publication bias, so forth. And occasionally in talks when I give, people say, but what if this is all a big hoax and there's no replication crisis? And I'm saying, let's just do a better science altogether. So let's say that we want to do better science. What's a way to do this? And I give academic year of lectures on how we can improve things, what kind of practices we can do, work with libraries and work with scholars and work with people in the field in order to try and see what we can do in order to make things better. However, today I'm going to focus on something a little bit simpler, and I think it's something that's already there. Many people are not that aware of this because of the inherent bias and the status quo that we have with the system. We've been doing things the same way for the last 50 years. But registry reports, Chris Chambers, and this revolution of a science reform have really brought up another option for us. So most of the slides here are from Chris Chambers. And one of the basic things that he asked himself when he was invited to be an editor in Corte in 2013, a neuroscience, a little bit traditional neuroscience journal, invited to be an editor. He says, I don't want to partake in this kind of system. I want to try something different. And luckily, the editor who invited him as an associate editor was willing to try a new kind of publication. So Chris was basically looking at things and saying, when we do hypothesis testing and we want to overcome outcome bias, hindsight bias, confirmation bias, what is the way that we should address this? Like, what's the easiest fix to this whole thing? And the thing that he came up with, which now seems trivial, but back then in 2013, he got a lot of backlash for, is just hide the results. The results should not determine whether something is published or not. So if we accept this as a good basic assumption of overcoming all these biases, then let's just have a publication where it doesn't matter what the results are. The reviewers, the editor, the journal is going to be blind to the results. So it's going to be published regardless of the outcome. So this is where registered reports came in. And I am with the argument that registered reports are the future of science. And really with my team, with my students, I've vowed, and it's been a long journey. It's like already 3-4 years that I've been trying to shift my research more and more, the confirmatory quantitative research towards register reports. And by now we've had quite a bit of experience. So the first journal to ever do this was Cortex with Chris Chambers trying this out. And the main principles back then were that the peer review should happen before the data collection. So people write what is referred to as a pre-registration plan, where you detail all your hypothesis, the experimental design, all the analysis that you're planning to run in order to test your theory and your hypothesis. And then it's sent to peer review before the data collection. Everybody, you, the reviewers, and the editor arrive at an agreement of what the best plan is. You might have a few back and forth. And then finally, when everybody agrees that this is the best plan, then the editor, the journal, gives you what is referred to as an in-principle acceptance, which means that regardless of the outcomes, as long as you follow the pre-registration plan or documented the deviation and justified them, as long as you did that, stage 2 is just to confirm that you followed the plan. And then regardless of the outcome, p-value higher or lower than 0.05, supported or not supported, it doesn't matter, it's going to be published at the end. So it might seem like a very simple concept, but it's revolutionary in so many different ways. So from this broken system of everything just like happens at the end, you develop, you design, you collect the data, and then you write up and submit. When you have peer review at this stage here at the end, things are already too late. It's too late because you've got hindsight bias, outcome bias, and all these publication bias about, the pursuit of novelty and positive findings. But also, as an author, it's too late because if something is wrong, if something is broken, if you need to amend something, there's no way to fix this. You need to go and collect data. Again, it's such a waste of time, resources, money. So a lot of things go wrong here. But in this registered report model, you have these 2 stages of peer review. Things are addressed in advance. So for me, having reviewers go over the plan that I have before data collection is so reassuring, because I am human. I have weaknesses. I do not have all the knowledge of all the literature. I have flaws, and so I make mistakes. And that helps me to get genuine, constructive, positive feedback to help me do better and improve. And I stopped counting the number of times where reviewers actually found issues with our plan and helped me improve to the point where I'm like, oh my God, I want to make you a co-author. Can I make you a co-author? But of course, the model is not like that, but it brings the community together where reviewers are actually helping drive better research rather than just criticizing and rejecting and adhering to all sorts of cognitive biases about what should be and should not be. So in stage 1, what do you do? As a reviewer, you're just going through the plan and thinking, is the theory solid? Are the hypotheses well-founded? Are the methods suitable for this? It's like power. So if it's not well-founded enough, then make sure you have a power analysis or a sensitivity analysis or some kind of justification in order to make sure that not always small samples, that we have sufficient samples in order to test what it is that we have in our research question, research design. And then all sorts of positive controls in advance, not after the fact, in advance, to make sure that we can address all kinds of challenges. And then after the in-principle acceptance, you don't have to worry. Do I need to impress anybody with my p-value lower than 0.05? Whatever you find, it's going to be published. So in stage 2, the reviewers sometimes it's for us, a breeze, because the detailed stage 1 pre-registration is compared to the new stage 2 based on the real data. And sometimes it's just like a very simple comparison. We have like a compared one, on the left, one on the right. And then it's very easy for the reviewers to see what are the deviations that has been updated. And the only thing that they need to review is, did they follow the protocol? Does, the way that they analyze the data, does it make sense? The interpretation of the results in the discussion. So you actually don't need to do anything with the introduction. You don't need to touch the methods. You just need to update the numbers in the results and then to write the discussion. So sometimes for us, stage 2 is just like a week of just like running the same R markdown code on the new data and then writing up the discussion. This is basically how simple it could be. And the review is often very simple, like a week or 2. So from this traditional model that has all sorts of problems, suddenly we have no publication bias. We can ensure all sorts of things like high power. We can incentivize a lot of things in for solid, high-quality research, and we don't have to worry about publication bias. There's no incentive to be hacking, post hoc hypothesizing, and so forth. So it used to be just like 2-3 journals that Chris Chambers was an editor in back in 2013. By now we have over 300, I think by now already 350 journals across different domains. So very successful model. If you want to see which journals are supporting what kind of registry reports, so you might have questions. For example, I do meta-analyses. Can I do a meta-analysis as a registry report? So you definitely can, but not with all journals. So some journals would say, we want to do registry reports, but not a meta-analysis. And in some are open to the possibility of a meta-analysis. So for example, we've done a couple of meta-analysis registry reports with a journal, Research in Personality. So that's a personality journal. And increasingly, there's more and more of these journals that are embracing meta-analysis. But whatever your domain is, whatever kind of research that you do, you can go and press on this link in order to see what's available to you. Some would ask, but how do I know how well they do registry reports? Because it's a relatively new thing. You need kind of training for this. So now we have community feedback. So we've asked people who have done registry reports to report how well the process was for them. So how good were the reviews in the first stage? Did they help you improve or not? And also, time. So one of the challenges that we've discussed before the talk about implementing registry reports, especially with students, is that is it going to be in time for the student to graduate or the student to complete the thesis, or job market like a year before graduation? Is it going to be ready for that? So you have feedback with stars and real measures of time of how long does it take to do a registry report, let's say with Royal Society of Open Science or Collabora Psychology or whatever it is in your field. So I invite you to go and press on these links in order to inform yourself and reduce the uncertainty of trying something new, like a registry report. I'll just very briefly talk about this science evidence pyramid. When I talk to my students in my classes, how do you evaluate the credibility of something? So when we open the news, sometimes big headlines, this paper came out in, PNAS based on a sample of 30 people saying that, something about social media and happiness, right? How do I know that this is credible? So I really like this based pyramid that I got from Chris Chambers, saying, if it's status quo research, which means no open science, it's not pre-registered, the stuff that we used to do, and some people still do up until now, to me, this is barely worth a mention, unless I see an accumulation of a large group of research that adheres to the principles of open science. I don't think it's worth disseminating. Even just the humility of me performing that research to say, hold on, before we go to the press, let me just confirm to make sure that what it is that I found is not a false positive. So status quo research, barely worth a mention. Exploratory open science, which means that the materials are archived so everybody can access this, is a little bit better, but still in the red zone. Even better than this is when people do a pre-registration, not a registry report, but a pre-registration where they go in order to fight their own biases and pre-register this, timestamp this on a public website. But register reports is where it gets a little bit green. So as we move up in this pyramid, register reports really offer the first time, I think, that we're getting very close to something that we can talk about with some confidence. We would like, ideally, to have independent labs doing this, repeating this, but registry report already adheres to a very high level of confirmatory quantitative research. And then maybe in a decade or two, we'll have meta-analyses of registry reports. I am also of the opinion that meta-analysis should be registry reports, so I added these two on top. So registry report, meta-analysis of registry reports with everything open data, code, and search. And then perhaps there are already some projects that do this, one that is continuously updated all the time. So if a new piece of evidence comes in, it is almost automatically plugged into the meta-analysis, so people can have almost immediately the most up-to-date information about a specific phenomenon. So I think at this point, perhaps you can have a feel that something important is happening. Like registry reports offer all sorts of things, but you're thinking, now this is not for me because I have this pressure. Like I need to get tenure, I need to find a job, get a postdoc, get a tenure track. I don't have time to try new things. So I'm going to make the argument that registry reports are not just good for science and the system, they're also good for you. So the first most obvious thing is that it reduces stress. I remember as a PhD and a postdoc, the stress of, will I get the significant results or not get the significant results? There's so much risk involved in this. Am I clever enough for these brilliant novel findings? I didn't understand how these top researchers keep producing these papers with a p-value lower than 0.05 with samples of 20 all the time. You just focus on doing good science. So it takes away all the stress. It's like you do good, solid research at stage one, and then regardless of this, you get an outcome. Not only this, but if you're unsure of yourself, and I'm still, after 6 years of assistant professor, I'm still unsure of myself, and I'm sure about many other things, you get constructive, positive expert feedback, not about how stupid you are, but rather than just saying reject, it says, please, here is another way of implementing this. Consider doing it this way. I'm just so grateful for all this. Another thing, and I think this is very important to understand, so I do a lot of replications, and people are sensitive to replications. People don't like, for some reason, their studies to be revisited. So before, when we did the traditional model and we would submit replications to journals, our rejection rate was quite high. I would say 70, 80% of our papers would be rejected. And then we would have to do this horrible gaming of journal reject, okay, another journal, okay, reject another journal. Hated it. We moved to registry reports. What is our rejection rate? Our rejection rate is 0. I have not been rejected from a registry. There's no reason to reject you, because if there's an issue, you just fix it. So if you ask Chris Chambers, even in journals like Cortex, from a 90% rejection rate, it goes down to something like 10. And even the 10 are technical things where people just don't understand what a registry report is. What is the rejection for a second stage, after the in-principle acceptance? Very close to 0 in places like Cortex. It's also faster. People think, but it's going to take more time. The only thing that it does is that it takes the time that's invested at the end and pushes it to the beginning. So you need to plan things a little bit better. And we're going to talk about this. The biggest advantage that I see for students, especially early career researchers, is that when you have an in-principle acceptance, this is a guaranteed publication. Put it on your CV. It's already there. If anything, the new university that you are thinking of joining, or the job that you think, is going to be very impressed by this, because they know that by the time you join them, this is when the second stage, the publication will be under their affiliation. So it really communicates that you have already done a very good job, and that guaranteed publication will happen when you join a certain place. So it's not a manuscript under review. It's not just a preprint. It's a community journal endorsed guaranteed publication that is worth mentioning on your CV. And all sorts of other things. One other thing that I will say is that people are very worried, especially early career researchers, will I get funding? Can I get funded? It's so much easier to convince funders to fund you when you say, hey, I have a guaranteed publication from a good journal that you support. So 0 risk for the funders. It reduces all the uncertainty for them as well. Is there evidence that registry reports are working as intended? Definitely. So we can already see some preliminary meta science indication that this is indeed the case. So for example, positive findings are reduced from 90 plus to something around 50, lower than 50 in registry reports. So it means that they're working as expected. And even when we do randomized control trials where people evaluate manuscripts without knowing whether there were registry reports or whether there were traditional reports. And we ask them, what is the methods rigor? What is the analysis rigor? What is the overall quality of the paper? You can see that registry reports are being evaluated blindly as being much higher quality than traditional ones. So amazing meta-scientific findings that are coming out. Not everything is perfect, but for the early stages of registry reports, we already have a lot indicating that this seems to be the right direction. If you want a good summary of this whole thing, I really recommend for you to go visit the summary by Chris Chambers and colleagues here of all the journey that they've been through in the last 10 years. So from 2021. Also, and I think this is the most important thing, all sorts of misconceptions about registry reports. So people, for example, are really worried, I will not be able to do exploratory findings because I have to pre-register everything in advance. This is not the case. The only thing that registry reports are meant to do is to commit to a certain conformatory findings, but you can explore as much as you want as long as you're very clear that this is exploratory and not conformatory. So it's more about transparency and documenting things very, very clearly. So go over this list of misconceptions. Perhaps you have some worries about registry reports. Chris Chambers has a lot of experience in explaining why registry reports don't have those misconceptions, are plainly wrong. And if anything, registry report is the solution to some of the problems that people think about in registry reports. So I won't go over this, but just the one thing that I think most early, so I work a lot with students and early career researchers. Registry reports are especially suitable for students and early career researchers, and I'll give you some of our evidence for that. First piece of evidence, my MPhil student, who is now a PhD in Vienna, so Chinyu, I asked him, can you please summarize? He was the first one to ever try a registry report with me. So I asked him, published already in a journal that is dedicated to registry reports called Comprehensive Results in Social Psychology. So I asked him, can you please summarize things for me? I won't read this out to you, so I'll just summarize this for you. Help reduce uncertainty, helps him as an MPhil student have more confidence in what he's doing, catch errors in design, more peace of mind, saves a lot of time. And then finally, here, in terms of his perspective as an early career researcher, he was feeling so blessed by having expert reviewers contributing and helping him improve his design. And he says, I especially recommend this to students, early career researchers, research postgraduates, and so forth. So hopefully by now you have a basic understanding of registry reports and how to get that information. Is there a way to improve on this? And I'm going to go through this very briefly. We can. And there's something called peer community in registry reports. And my claim is that this is the future. I really believe in that. I have changed everything that I do in order to support that as much as possible. Registry Reports 2.0, it's reviews on preprints happening by the community for the community with no publishers involved whatsoever, where everything is open. The peer review is open, the citations, the recommendations of registry reports. So it really solves a lot of the main issues. I'm going to mention three of the things, the many things that peer community in registry reports improves on registry reports. This revolutionary thing where peer review is guaranteed to take 2 weeks. So you don't have to wait. So I can do this with thesis students. I can even do this with a 1 semester course students. I'll show you how this happens. In addition, you work with the community, by the community, for the community endorses something, and then there's a whole list of about 30 friendly journals that you can choose who you want to publish with. If they charge APCs, you would tell them, I don't have to publish with you, I can publish with the other one. So it gives the power back to the authors rather than the publishers. So really a revolution in the way that we think about publishing altogether. And this is a very important thing. All of the peer review is not only open, it's also, you have the possibility of asking for it to be identifiable. So when you do replications, you want to know, for example, if original authors are very hostile, that they will have to sign their name. So a lot of the hostility and the negativity that we had before has almost disappeared completely in peer community. How do they do this magic of 2 weeks peer review? They have something called a snapshot. So you prepare a snapshot. It's a 1 page, just summarizing what is the basic theory, hypothesis, how you're going to analyze the data. It's not peer reviewed. They only use this 1 page in order to recruit reviewers. You submit this 6 weeks in advance. I want to aim to this specific date. They go recruit reviewers asking them, can you review on this week? While you're still working on your plan. Everybody aims for the same date 6 weeks in the future, and then reviewers do this within 1 week, editor does another week, then within 2 weeks, you get a very detailed decision letter, and they try to minimize this into a 1-round review so that the editor will tell you, if you do A, B, C, D based on these reviews, then we will give you an in-principle acceptance. So unbelievable. Now I'm able to do with a 6 months thesis with all of my undergraduates and thesis students were able to complete the thesis as a peer community and registered report and a guaranteed publication. After you get endorsed by the community, who can you publish with? So right now, I admit it's not the highest impact factors. So automatically, you can publish with, for example, Cortex. If you do a neuroscience, if I would be a neuroscientist, I would just go peer community, peer community, peer community, and then automatically endorsed and published with Cortex with no additional peer review, just based on the community. For me, in my field, Collabor Psychology is a very important journal. International Review of Social Psychology. More recently, Zoltan became an editor in this APA journal that is about consciousness. So a few of these already have impact factors quite high, not A+, but already accepted over there. But in addition, you've got PCIRR interested journals, and here you have some familiar names like Nature, Human Behavior. So what they do is they sit in the back and they get alerts for who got community endorsement. And then they might contact you. And this has happened to me, that they contacted us and said, this is a really interesting piece of research. Would you consider publishing with us? So that is a possibility. You can also contact them if you want to. Many other things, I'll just say I was able to convince my university to support this with $1,000 per each student in order to fund their data collection. So if a student comes in with an in-principle acceptance, stage 1 in-principle acceptance, zero risk for the university. They already know that this is going to be published. Of course, they would want the student to be able to run this. So perhaps you can run similar things in Purdue. How many have we done? 5, it's only been around for 2 years, but we've already published 5 of this. So you're welcome to go and click on any of these links. We have another 7, 8 that already received a stage 1 in principle acceptance. So what you can see here is that each one of those underlined are my students, my thesis students, and they submit their thesis as part of the academic curriculum, the academic year, and get feedback from experts in order to improve their thesis. So it's unbelievable. Undergraduates, masters, top masters, all have their thesis published with community effort, finally ending up in journals. And we have a lot of stage 1 in principle acceptance and things going on. If you want to see all of the peer community that has been endorsed, stage 2, here's a link. There's quite a few of them already. I asked one of the early career researchers that is working with us to summarize this, just like with Chinu before, but this is about peer community and register reports. So here is Yi Kang saying that he has learned a lot, very open science community, a lot of support and feedback. So if you're tired of the negativity and the hostility in the academic system, it really makes you feel like you're part of the community and you're not alone. It's very feasible and highly rewarding. If you want to see some of the work that I do with my students, you're welcome to follow any of these links, including Yi Kang over here. I just want to show you what this looks like. So this is, for example, one thing that we did with Yi Kang. Chris Chambers issued a recommendation based on a publicly available preprint. You can see not just the recommendation of, which journals can it be published with, what is the recommendation. You can see all of our replies, the back and forth. What did they say? How did we reply? Track changes of the file from stage 1 to stage 2, and the peer review. So here, for example, Roger was the previous editor of Journal of Experimental Social Psychology. So can you imagine that for a student to have this kind of a reviewer coming in as part of the community? Unbelievable. And on Open Science Framework, we share everything. So you can see all of our quote checks, the simulated data in stage 1, and so forth. So overall experience, so positive. I am so happy that the community and the scientific community came up with this, and now there's a different solution. I cannot look back. It's very difficult for me to go back to the traditional journals. And when I look on Twitter, some of us here are very active on Twitter. So I see a lot of people are saying, oh my gosh, this is a revolution. I'm so happy to be a reviewer. I'm so happy to be an author as part of this community. If you want to know more, not just from me, but from the people who created this platform, like Chris Chambers, here's a list of talks. I invite you to go and click on any of this to get more information. If you want articles on how this works, just go and there's a selection over here. Everything that I mentioned, I know it was very fast and brief, but everything that I mentioned is on my website, publicly available, all the research projects that we've been doing. So you can scan the barcode, you can go on my website. I know this was a lot and you might have a lot of questions. Some of them maybe we can address now if we have time, but I just want to say, I'm open for personal communication. So if you have any concerns, anything that you think that we can help you in your journey towards open science, in trying out registry reports, in perhaps considering peer community in registry report, don't hesitate. Especially if you're an early career researcher or a student, please do reach out. Even if I'm very busy, I will definitely respond and connect you with some of the other people in the team in order to support you and help you figure out how to do things and how to do better in your open science journey. I also have a mailing list, so everything that we do with the team, you're welcome to sign up and see any other events or talks. So that's it from me. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
So the one question that I have, and you mentioned that 0% or a very low percentage get rejected, and I think the one thing that I saw as an editor who implemented the RRs at assessment was that it really comes down to two things for rejection, right? It's not about the study methods, but it's about the fit for the journal, and it's about whether this is an interesting study in the first place. And I think the latter of those two is one that I think it's glossed over a bit, because I think there's sort of this assumption that any study would be interesting, but really the kind of job of peer review is to sort of say whether or not this is kind of a piece of that. And so I'm wondering your thoughts on that, and particularly for that kind of RR 2.0 that you talked about, where it seems like the journal's kind of decided later, as I understand what you're describing. How does that work?
Yeah, good question. I have to say that I revised my thinking about this, and I realized that my thinking is a little bit old school. And if we're talking about researcher biases, our world as researchers is a little bit limited. Also, as editors, as experienced as you might be, knowing that the benefit of a piece of information is to the community is very difficult to evaluate in advance. You have a lot of Nobel Prize winning people saying that they've tried all the different journals and then finally had to go to an F journal in order to publish what later became a Nobel Prize winning kind of piece of evidence. So first, you on your own piece of evidence is is this worthy? Is it not worthy? I used to have a lot of thoughts about I'm not worthy enough, therefore nobody's going to take an interest in this. But even so one of the reasons why I really believe in preprints is that getting community feedback on preprints, making things available, sometimes I'm baffled by the kind of value that people find in my research that I did not expect. So I think first, the aspect of doing peer review on preprints, community journals and all that is great, but already making things available on preprints allows others to perhaps find value that you or the journal is not open to or don't have the insights for. In terms of fit, I think every journal can decide for themselves whether they focus on a certain kind of domain or if they have certain standard for certain things. So they want to do quantitative and they want to do this in a specific way. So it's completely okay for them to do this. I just don't think that they should do this after a lot of investment from reviewers in the community. So an editor can take a day or two in order to read the thing, evaluate the fit based on the let's say the snapshot or perhaps an initial plan, and then not waste the reviewer resources, which are already very scarce, in just saying, okay, let's reject. So for example, right now, a very open science advocate, Simin Vazir, we were baffled that psychological science was able to take somebody like Simin Vazir. We all believe in her. She is definitely very open to publishing all kinds of research and very rigorous, very open science related. Still, psychological science has a rejection rate of 60, 70%. So completely okay for journals to say, okay, this kind of research we will not do, and we want to focus on that kind of research. So in peer community, journals can take the path of what's called PCIRR interested. So we're not going to publish everything. We're going to publish a very specific type of journal. And sometimes we also want to do our own calibration. So we will send the community endorsed preprint to an editor, not another round of reviewers, but to other editors to evaluate the fit to the journal. And if it fits, then we'll publish it. But also, if you're a journal editor and you go with the PCIRR interested, which is automatically publishing things that are endorsed by the community, you can definitely say, I will only publish manuscripts of a certain type. So for example, I do social psychology. I cannot publish in peer community investigative report with Cortex, because Cortex said it has to be neuroscience. It has to have this kind of piece of evidence. So when you communicate with peer community in registered reports, you can set your own terms for what this automatic endorsement would be. So within the criteria of what it is that you want your journal to be about, if you've said that well, you are saying everything that falls under that has been endorsed by the community, which means high rigor, open science, all the open peer review and so forth, then I will automatically endorse this. But you can definitely state your own terms. So generally, I'm for opening up as much as possible, putting things preprint, allowing the community and beyond to give you feedback about the value of your research. But I definitely recognize that journals would need to have their own process, and they just need to define this very well in order to have the community and them work together in order to align not just the future of everything open, everything publishable, but also right now with the current system to make sure that everything works for both sides.
Thank you.
Anybody else with a question? Well, I'll ask mine, and we've chatted about this before. I mean, I really love the registered reports model, right? And you know, for students coming out, I mean, I think it's the best way to do science, right? But there are a limited number of journals that take it. I mean, even if you go PCIRR, and you have these PCIR friendly journals, and they're willing to accept it. You even noted some of their impact factors are not that high. How do we get other academics and people who make decisions about jobs and promotions and merit raises to care more about sort of the publishing process, like the registered report, than they do about the results and caring about kind of the impact factors of the journals that these things are appearing in? It's a huge question. It's outside of your talk. I just wonder what your thoughts are on how can we get people to appreciate this type of science more?
Yeah, great question. And I deal with this quite often and think about this very often. But first, I want to make a clarification. There's nothing stopping you from taking the community endorsed manuscript and going to a journal. And often if you would do that, the journal would be impressed with you having the community endorsement, especially given that everything is open, especially when you have editors, let's say like Chris Chambers, especially when you can show the entire journey that you've been to. Journals don't like spending reviewers' time or even their time just doing the same kind of work again. So they will take this into consideration, and happened on a number of occasions. So for example, Journal of Experimental Psychology General, not a small journal, the editor has reached out to me saying, you conducted a replication of an article in our journal. Would you consider sending this over to us? So it seems like some editors are willing to engage with this. Nature Human Behavior, not a small journal. So if you do things that fall under what it is that they would normally do if you would submit to them directly, if you do the exact same thing with PCIRR, you can actually contact them and saying, I want to do this with the community, but I want to ensure that this falls under nature, human behavior, and that you will be willing to accept this. You can talk and negotiate with them in order to ensure that at the end, you will get, if you care about nature, human behavior, that they will support you. Because the editors over there, especially of all the nature journals, nature, human behavior have people that understand open science and want to support the community. So journal editors, even of the high-ranking top journals that we care about, seem to understand that something important is happening here, and they want to engage in this. Because we're some of the first to publish with peer community and registry reports, I many times take what we have received community endorsement for and submit this to journals or email journals that do not that are not on this list. So the latest one is Cognition and Emotion. I'm communicating with Sander Cole, just trying to understand, will Cognition and Emotion start considering peer community? And they're hesitant. They have all kinds of different concerns. But by people like me trying out different journals and helping with the process, there will be more and more of these journals that might consider this. It will take some time, but for example, psychological science having Simin Vazir, I'm just like, this is a revolution. So if you contact Simin Vazir and saying, for even replications, we're considering to do a high quality replication of something in psychological science through peer community, would you consider? I already know what the answer is going to be. In JPSP, I don't know if in your domain it's well known, but Journal of Personality in Social Psychology, definitely an A+ in social psychology. The editors right now are open science supportive people. So things are changing, especially in social psychology. More and more editors are seeing the impact of what's happening with the community, having all these positive things coming up. So it will take another 5-10 years, I don't know how long, but things, I think, at least in social psychology, are going to shift. How to make a more systematic change? Good question. But I feel like peer community, people who do holy work, really, like Simon, like Chris Chambers, out there advocating for all kinds of changes in the system, are slowly but surely making a big difference. I think one of the biggest revolutions that's going to come out in the upcoming years is peer community in psychology. So this is being worked on to not just have registry reports, but if you like to do things like collect the data and write everything up and then submit it. So peer community in psychology will come out. Hopefully they will have more and more endorsing journals, and the more open science advocates that get into these editorial boards or into leading senior associate editors roles, the more likely it is that it's gonna change. Grant authorities, I think just this week or last week, the Gates Foundation saying, we don't pay APCs anymore, we just do preprints. You need to go, not for the, nature, human behavior, but you need to publish in places that are by the community, for the community. So if the funders are starting to speak differently in Europe, they've already been speaking like this for 3-5 years in the Netherlands. So things are definitely changing. If funders are doing things differently, if the journals are doing things differently, if there's platforms and communities that are changing the way that we do things, I hope that authors will follow. The question is, right now, I know this is a big risk. I feel this. I'm up for tenure this year. I was a little bit hesitant, to say the least, about making this kind of shift. How is this going to impact? And I've had some negative feedback from my department, from my university, about this shift in direction. What is these open, diamond open access journals? What is this peer community? What are you doing? But I really believe in this as the right direction. And I can already see that if you do this enough, after 3 years of doing this in my department, people are shifting. Some of the seniors in my department are trying this with their students. So things are changing slowly but surely. It will take some time. But I feel the change.